Good morning, everyone. My name is Sue. On behalf of the Goochland branch of the Pamunkey Regional Library, welcome to today's program, Regenerative Gardening. This is part of the 2022 horticultural series developed in a partnership between the library and the Goochland Powhatan Master Gardener Association. Today's presenter is Pat Lust. Pat is a retired Longwood University faculty member and a longtime master gardener. She is currently spending a lot of time growing native plants and talking about them. Her backyard nursery focuses mostly on perennials and bushes, but includes a few other types of plants as well. Let's get started. The chat feature is available, so please send us your questions. They'll be addressed at certain points through the presentation. Here is Pat Lust with Regenerative Gardening.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. Welcome. The program that I'm going to do this morning is a general overview. We're not going to go into depth on anything, and hopefully some of the programs that may follow will go into depth on more things. But our goal this morning is to just look at a lot of things related to regenerative gardening and maybe look at some ways that people are thinking about things that are not the same as we are thinking, and maybe get some new ideas, and we'll see where we go from there. Uh-oh, I have to figure this out now. There we go. Give me just a second here. There we go. There we go. Okay. This program is probably the first piece in one of our modules in our new HOPE program. HOPE from the Garden, we call it, the Goochland Powhatan Master Gardeners Environmental Initiative. HOPE standing for Helping Our Planet Endure. And you'll be hearing a lot more about this as we develop more modules. But let's get started with this one. Oh, okay. This is not working like it's supposed to. So, all right, there we go. This is an overview of how I've organized this talk this morning. And I need to tell you ahead of time that at some point, I'm probably going to start hurrying because I've got more stuff here than we probably can do in an hour, but not to worry. There's some duplication in the last section that goes down into some examples that we're doing now. And if we miss some of those, we will have covered most of the philosophy and all of practical applications. So I'd like to start with this cute little cartoon that I found online, just to open up the subject of regenerative agriculture and gardening. Now, this goes sometimes faster than I can move. I have to shift gears here. So if it starts, listen before you see.
Regenerative agriculture is a set of farming practices that increase biodiversity in soil organic matter. Currently, most agricultural practices are devastating to biodiversity. Even organic agriculture, while not as bad, still does more harm than good. Regenerative agriculture is a way to reverse this trend to actually make a positive impact on the land. So what does regenerative agriculture actually involve? Answering this question is actually pretty tricky because the practices that work best largely depend on the land that's being worked with. So the variety of different practices border on infinity, a bit more than this video can cover. However, let's look at 3 common forms that regenerative agriculture can take. The soil is full of organisms which are helpful for plants. Some convert soil nitrogen into a plant-usable form. Some bring water to the plants that would otherwise be out of reach. Others loosen and aerate the soil, increasing water absorption and allowing plant roots to penetrate deeper. When soil is turned over by a machine, most of these organisms are killed, so the crops must rely on chemical fertilizer, which ends up leaching into the water. Central to no-till farming is to not do that. Instead of tilling, plant cover crops whose roots break up the soil. Let the worms aerate the soil and bring down nutrients. Keep the soil covered with an organic mulch, which will break down over time, adding more organic matter to the soil. From the release of methane to clearing forests for pasture land, cattle raising is known for being very environmentally destructive. But this is not inherent to grazing animals. If the right practices are put in place, enormous amounts of carbon can be sequestered into the ground, soil can be built, and even desertification can be reversed in a matter of years. Here's how it works. The growth of grass tends to start slow, accelerate, and slow down again. This middle area is where it accrues the most biomass the most efficiently. If it's eaten before it gets to this point, its growth will never speed up. This is what happens with traditional pastured animals. They eat all the grass, which doesn't have the chance to grow back fast enough before getting eaten again, and we have overgrazing. This leads to soil erosion, drought, and desertification. But if the animals are kept in a tightly packed herd like they used to be in nature, the grass has time to grow before being eaten. All that biomass in the grass is carbon that comes from the air. Not all of the grass gets eaten, however. Some of it gets pooped on and trampled, which ends up creating the perfect conditions for new topsoil to be built. This ends up happening incredibly quickly. This is one of the most complex and location-dependent practices there are. I will therefore be overgeneralizing a bit. It always starts with observing a local forest and the relationships between everything in it. The plants, the animals, the fungi, the landscape, the soil, the water, and then recreating these relationships in a way that's just as ecologically resilient, but produces more food. Food forests are often thought of as comprising 7 layers: the root layer, the ground cover layer, the herb layer, the shrub layer, the low tree layer, the high tree layer, and the vine layer. Every one of these layers either produces some sort of food or medicine, or is in some way helpful to the system as a whole. The plants are mostly perennials and include as many native species as possible. These 3 examples of regenerative agriculture, plus all the rest of them, all have something in common. Whereas in conventional agriculture, you seek to create as many of one thing as possible, in regenerative agriculture, you seek to create as many relationships between things as possible. You are one of those things. What sort of relationship with the land do you want to foster?
So there, I spent a little more time with the cows than might be useful for gardeners, but I thought the whole rest of it was very interesting. So we'll come back and talk about that a little bit as we go. I wanted to start with just a couple of definitions and perspectives. We talk about regenerative gardening as opposed to sustainable gardening, because sustainable simply means maintaining the same thing. And we've been pretty destructive for a lot of years. I don't know why we would want to sustain that when we could regenerate and rebuild. So that's why we use the term regenerative. The focus of regenerative gardening is healthy soil. It's all about the soil. And in healthy soil, there is a lot of carbon sequestration going on. So I just wanted to take a look at a couple of definitions. So a healthy soil gives maximum productivity. It's full of bacteria and fungi. And because of that, it has a lot of natural antibiotic qualities about it. Carbon sequestration, here's just as a definition. It's how plants take the carbon dioxide from the air through photosynthesis, move the carbon into the roots, where some of it stays in the roots, but a lot of it actually provides carbon to the soil microorganisms, that being the bacteria that make the nitrogen that the plants use, and also the fungi, however you say it, that make the mycorrhizal associations and are able to bring a lot of water and other nutrients to the plant roots in exchange for the carbon or sugar that the plant is giving to them. Oh, everybody wins. So that's what carbon farming, you've heard, I'm sure you've heard the term carbon farming, and that's just what it means. It means taking carbon dioxide from the air and putting it in the soil, which is just what plants do. So I like this quote: "The way we manage our gardens reflect the way we understand our ecosystem." I think that has to be true. Worrying about our ecosystem is not something that was a common thought when I was a young gardener. We just grew things. But now in 2022, it's a thing that we have to think about. So, oh, good, this is working now. The thing that we have to remember is that now in 2022, a lot of us are already doing a lot of things in our gardens, which would be considered regenerative gardening, because we've learned good practices over the last few years that many of us have incorporated. So I would suggest, if you have pencil and paper, you might jot down some of these or just stick them in the chat box and we'll come up with them. And if we have time, we'll talk about some of the things that you're already doing in your garden that would be considered regenerative gardening. We all know the slogan about various slogans about buying local produce to reduce the carbon footprint. And I just put this little thing in here about how the Mayans thrived in harmony with the earth because they didn't have all the distractions that we have used the last 100 years in destroying our soil. So if we look back far enough, there's a lot of good practice to look at. And of course, post-World War, there were all the wonderful victory gardens, food grown locally and consumed locally, gardens where there would be something else, waste perhaps. And we're going to skip the questions right now and take the first two sections all at once. And so let's go right into the regenerative agriculture and regenerating gardening outline here. I've divided it. I got something on my screen here I need to get rid of. There we go. I've divided it into goals, principles, and practical applications. This next section, we're going to take the goals and principles, and then we're going to spend a little more time on the practical applications, because I think that's probably what we all want to look at. So the general, oops, not working again. So the general goals are to draw down carbon dioxide, rebuild topsoil, and in doing that, we provide both drought and flood resistance. It's all about the soil. Regenerative agriculture, regenerative gardening is all about the soil. So let's look at the principles. The principles, that's what we're going to hook all of our activities onto, is the general principles. And again, you might want to make some notes about which of these are important to you, how this might influence you, how you already have this under control, whatever. Put them in the chat box, whatever. So we're going to look at the principles of regenerative practice from three different perspectives. We're going to look at it from the perspective of farming, agriculture, and then the environmentalist, and then the soil scientist. And you'll find a common thread among these. And once we get through these three, I'll try to summarize them for us as gardeners. So the first principle, which you already saw in the little cartoon, minimizing the soil disturbance. No-till farming has become pretty universal in this country now. When I was a child, farmers plowed the ground every spring, or some of them even got a head start and did it in the fall to provide the opportunity for even more erosion. But now pretty much we don't do that. No-till is the thing. Keeping the ground covered. This is something that we still have some work to do on, and maximizing plant and crop diversity, or the whole idea of biodiversity. This is something that the Midwestern farming with all their monoculture does not do. It might be a good idea if they did, but we in our gardens, there's no reason that we cannot look at that. Now, the agriculture integrates livestock, and it's very important to integrate livestock for a lot of reasons in the farming, but I put that in yellow because that doesn't really apply to us as gardeners. Well, I have a joke in here a little bit later for you that you'll see also in green letters, because I found something that I thought was quite amusing that I want to share with you. It'll be our seventh inning giggle when we get there. If you look at it from the environmental perspective, the number one thing then becomes biodiversity, because the environmentalist is looking at a larger area than a farmer. A farmer has his farm. The environmentalist is looking at perhaps a whole state, or at least a region. So they're looking at the biodiversity, enriching the soil. Enriching the soil is both covering that soil and not tilling it. Improving the watersheds. Well, for the farmer, that's an end result. For the environmentalist, that's a target goal, and enhancing the ecosystem services. If you look at it from the soil scientist perspective, keep the soil covered, minimum disturbance. Maximize living roots is one that comes in here for the soil scientist that the others didn't mention. But when you keep the soil covered and minimize the disturbance, the roots get a chance to do what they are supposed to do, and the maximization is automatic. And again, diversity. So here I've tried to summarize the core principles into 3 for us as gardeners: minimize soil disturbance, maximize plant cover, and go for all the biodiversity you can. So we'll stop here for a minute if there are any questions so far.
If you have any questions, please send them to the chat. Pat, right now, there are no questions.
Well, then I'll keep on going, because once we get into the last section, we can have more conversation if there's time. So let me keep on going. So in talking about the practical applications, I've divided all of these things into 5 categories here. And this slide will keep coming back to divide them so that we don't lose track of where we are. So let's start with covering the soil. We talk about cover crops and ground cover. And what's the difference between the two? Well, a cover crop is a crop that you plant between other crops to cover the ground while the other crop is not there. A ground cover is something that you plant together with the other crops to cover the ground while something else grows tall. The picture at the bottom is green and gold. It grows about 4 inches tall. Well, I've seen it taller, but it doesn't grow much taller than that at my house. It will spread and cover the ground around some other things that you're growing in your garden. It likes a little bit of shade, but we've got some growing in Powhatan that's in full sun, and it seems to be doing way better than I expected. The crop on the right is crimson clover. It's a common crop that farmers plant between other crops. And you can use it in your garden too. When you're planting cover crops in your garden, you've got to be careful about not letting these things go to seed, because when you let, for instance, buckwheat go to seed, well, then you have another problem to deal with. Cover crops are generally annuals. Ground covers are generally perennials. They keep growing and growing. And so let's take a look at some cover crops. The reason you use cover crops, of course, is to increase the organic matter, but also to keep the ground covered. And anytime there are roots, they're going down and mining for nutrients, bringing up those nutrients. The nutrients are then in the green of the plant, which then decays and puts more back on the soil. And so you just can't lose. The bottom photograph there is a radish. We experimented with radishes over in the Powhatan pollinator garden last year. Radishes are known for putting down their roots and breaking up the soil, and farmers use them for that reason. If you have a lot of clay soil, you might want to use radishes as a cover crop to help break up the soil. Oops, it keeps changing for me sometimes there. These are just some examples of cover crops. As I read the literature, 2 of the terms which I thought were very interesting. For cover crops, they use the term green manure. For ground covers, they often use the term green mulch, and I use the term green mulch as a small gardener myself. I don't use cover crops, but I use ground covers a lot. And when you use a ground cover, then you don't need to put so much mulch down because the ground is already covered, and the cover crop is holding the moisture and keeping the ground cool, which is usually what you put mulch down for. Some ground covers, The one at the top is it's a plumbago. I have that in my yard. Because it's pretty aggressive, I always pull it out as much as I can in the spring to let the other plants get a good start. And then it moves in and covers the ground around the other plants in that garden. And then in the fall, late summer, it blooms those beautiful blue flowers and the leaves turn red. So that's one of my favorites. The one on the bottom I have in some other places that cover the ground permanently, and other things growing among them. The one on the bottom is called wild pinks. Use natives whenever possible, especially for ground covers. It's easy to use. For cover crops, it's not so easy to use native plants, but for ground covers, it's very easy to use native plants. And at all costs, avoid invasive plants. And those invasive plants are a whole nother area we could go, but not today. All right, let's move on to the second area in our practical applications, feeding and nurturing the soil. A lot of you do compost heaps. I know some of you do. I don't particularly, but I save everything and put it on somebody else's compost heap. I really hate to send any of the yard waste to the dump because my town doesn't have a town compost heap like they ought to. So some of my friends get my yard waste. Compost, once it's processed, it just looks nice. It looks like mulch. And so it's a good thing to do. Use of other organic materials. A lot of people do put down wood chips and various kinds of mulch, and that's all good because it helps to add organic matter and to protect the soil. Pine needles are great. They take a long time to break down. Straw is great. Be careful you don't get hay, because hay will be full of seeds, and well, then there's that seed problem again. Living mulch is, we just talked about it, the ground covers, the green mulch, living mulch, all sorts of terms. And well, chop and drop slipped in here. It's coming up this, a little bit later. One of our Master Gardener volunteers is experimenting rather extensively with Hügelkultur right now, meaning mound culture. And it's where you make a mound, and you can see from the two graphics on the left that you can either dig a hole and start it in the hole, or you can start on top and build a higher mound. And it's a layering process where you put rotting logs and sticks on the bottom. You don't want to put fresh timber there. You want to put something that's already got the microorganisms in there doing their rotting thing. And you put that on the bottom, and then you cover it with normal things that you would put in your compost heap. And then you top it with what you're going to grow in. And this is like a living compost heap that lasts for a few years as it disintegrates, and the logs on the bottom rot, and everything kind of collapses down. And the next thing you know, you have a flat surface again. One of the things that I think is really interesting is that those rotting logs are known for holding moisture. And so once you get it started and get everything growing, you're just not going to have to water it very often, because you got the logs in there holding on to that moisture, and the roots will go down in there and have a good time. Chop and drop. Now, this is not a practice that we engage in very much here. We did when I was a kid. We had a lot of other bad practices in our gardens at that time, but we never carried out any plants. We either cut them off and let them lie in the path, or just sort of beat them down where they were and left them in the soil. The green went back into the soil, and they just decompose in place. Now, the one at the top is just a bunch of stuff chopped down and left. This can be problematic. I was in a coffee field once where they left all their pruning branches in the paths. Personally, I had trouble walking in that, but apparently the guys in the heavy boots didn't, so whatever. The one on the bottom, I know of a farm, an organic farm in Maine that practices this. This is actually a cover crop that has been beaten down and left to die. one of the things, I'll talk about Rodale Institute a little bit later, but one of the things that they've invented is a thing called crimper. There are two words. It's a crimper, and it's a roller crimper. That's what it's called. It's a big roller that you instead of using chemicals on the cover crop to destroy it in the spring, you roll it and it breaks the stems and crushes the plant in such a way that it kills it. And everything is left there without chemicals. And there are by hand ways of doing this. I've seen people go through with a board and push it down like they're on the bottom. But anyways, getting that organic matter back, just leaving it there where it grew, and then it adds to the next crop. Okay, moving on to just avoid disrupting the soil. We were making a new garden over at the Powhatan Pollinator Garden, and instead of trying to kill the grass and plow the soil and all the stuff that we used to do, we just put down a bunch of cardboard like this. And then we covered the cardboard with some mulch and some soil and you know, watered it a lot. And then we just went ahead and planted. And by the time the cardboard has disintegrated, everything that was growing underneath it has also disintegrated. And then you can start the soil building down into whatever you covered to start with. Regular mulching helps to keep preventing. Now, you do have to dig in the soil when you're planting a plant in it or planting seeds, but you don't have to disrupt the whole mass when you're planting a row or a single seed. Also, putting down mulch saves a lot of back-breaking, wow, that's hard to say, back-breaking digging, and all the stuff that you put down adds to the soil. This is something that we've been talking about a lot over in the pollinator garden. No fall cleanup. Leave the stuff in the fall because, first of all, there are lots of seeds that the birds like to eat. It's fun to watch the birds. You see the photograph there. It's some kind of plant with a lot of flowers on it that the seeds are there and the birds are still having a feast. So leave it. Also, a lot of insects, and I don't know much about insects, I have to confess, but a lot of insects use this kind of debris standing for overwintering in one way or another. And then when you do clean up, when we clean up our perennials in the spring, we always cut them above the root and leave the root because the root's going to grow again. We can also cut annuals. I mean, you can't do this in a 40-acre field in the same way, but in our gardens, there are a lot of things that we left that we can cut above the ground and leave the roots to disintegrate and add to the soil. Remember, all those roots have mycorrhizal and other associations in the soil, and when you pull them up, you disrupt that. Oh, well, there's our slide, exactly that. I love this quote. Microbes will feed the world, or why real farmers grow soil, not crops. So, all right, moving on to cultivating deep roots. The best way is to have some natives in your garden. Now, this almost sounds contrary because when we grow broccoli and tomatoes and those sorts of things, those are not native plants. Those are friendly garden plants. They cause no harm. They give us food, and we're going to grow them. But we can also include some native plants because the native plants generally are perennial. And by being a perennial, they have a chance to develop deeper roots because they stay in the same, oh, sorry about that cat, because they stay there longer. So native plants are one way of helping to build the soil. Please take out your invasive plants because they may not harm your soil as much as they harm the rest of the environment, but they're just there for no good. Plant perennials. Now, there are a lot of perennials that are not native. For example, that asparagus you see in the picture there is a perennial. It has nice roots and does a whole lot of good things in the soil. And all perennials, let's see. Okay, let me say most perennials develop good mycorrhizal associations. Now, the plants that do not develop any mycorrhizal associations are the brassicas, like your cauliflower and broccoli and cabbage and all of those. They do not develop, but none of them are perennials. They're biennials, some of them, but not perennials. So with the perennials, again, you're minimizing the soil disruption. Now, I think this little chart that I have on this slide is on your handout. So you can look at that more carefully when you have some time. So we're down to energizing with diversity. And this is a real open subject that kind of leaves it to your imagination, because I'm sure there are a whole lot of things that belong in here. Native Americans got it right when they did the Three Sisters. You know, the cornstalk was there, the bean could climb, or the squash could climb up, or the bean, whichever one was climbing, could climb right up the corn, and the other could cover the soil. And so you had all the good things about regenerative gardening going on all at once. Also, mixed crops can cut down on pests, and sometimes just that will keep your nasty insects at bay. Crop rotation is important for a couple of reasons. If you plant the same thing in the same place in your garden every year, you're more likely to have a pest returning every year because they know where to find it. So if you rotate the crops, you can confuse the pests a little bit, and it takes them a little longer to find the new place where you put it, and maybe they won't even at all. But plant nutrition is also important. As you know, the legumes put nitrogen in the soil, and some other plants like a lot of nitrogen. So if you rotate them so that the ones that like a lot of nitrogen follow the ones that fix the nitrogen, then you have a benefit there too. Now here's your 7th inning giggle. This is actually kind of silly, but I put it in here because I just thought it was kind of interesting. I know that ducks will go after slugs and grubs and a lot of things that we want out of the garden, but this one article I read prompted me to put this in here. This guy trained his little ducklings from babies to eat insects, not plants. And so then he turned them loose in his garden. Now, this is not scientific research I'm giving here. Please do not take this as a recommendation. This is your 7th inning giggle. But if any of you ever do try birds in your garden for any reason and have any success, I'd sure love to know. Any questions at this point?
Pat, we did have a question and a comment from Ginger in the earlier section. She asked, what is the easiest way to do no-till in raised beds? I use cover crops and till in the spring. I also use wood chip mulch during the summer.
Well, I think you could just skip the tilling section. If you're using raised beds, you already have soil that you've created to be loose and so that you can just plant right in it. I don't know any reason that you would actually till a raised bed. On the other hand, I'm not an expert at raised beds, and if there's somebody else on this call who would like to answer that question differently, turn on your microphone and do so.
Ginger also sent another comment. My ducks are great in the garden. Chickens, so much.
Really? Oh, Ginger, we have to talk. Ginger, please leave your email in the chat box. I would like to know about that. All right, let's go on so that we can have some conversation at the end. This is one of my favorite places to talk about. This is Finca Marta, a small farm. You might call it a garden, you might call it a farm. It's somewhere in between in our terms. It's about 10 miles, I don't know what direction, outside of Havana in Cuba. This is a farmer who was a agriculture professor, and he decided that he was tired of standing up and talking about it. He just wanted to do it. And his farm looks like this on one side. On the other side, he has cattle. They use everything. As a matter of fact, they cook with the methane they collect from the cow leavings. And it's just a wonderful, marvelous place. There are several things on the web. If Finca Marta is the name of it, if you want to Google it. It's a model of agroecology. He also does agrotourism. If you go to his farm, you will have a marvelous lunch, all food from the farm. I have recommended the Rodale Institute before. They have some exciting research going there. This is a farm that's, I'm not sure how far from Philadelphia it is. I went there once by bus and I have no idea how we got there. So I recommend a visit there if you are ever in the area. It's very enlightening. They have a lot of scientists working there, scientist gardeners, actually, scientist farmers, and they have a lot of publications. They are also involved with this regenerative organization, Certified Food. As you might know, that little green circle that you get that says organic certified, the USDA. The real organic farmers believe that there's got to be soil involved if it's an organic product, but that little seal has started to include some hydroponic farming. And so some of the land gardeners are trying for this new symbol. I have not seen it yet myself, but it's something to look into. Now I want to show you another video. This is an organization called Kiss the Ground, and they have a lot of neat stuff, including courses in regenerative gardening. So let's see if I can manage this video exchange here again. Hold on.
Planting a garden has the power to change the world, and even you can do it. Us gardeners, we do a lot to sustain our gardens, but sustainable. See, that's old news. Because it leaves you in the same damn place. Where a big movement of the gardeners are going right now, they're going regenerative. Because regenerative gardening actually helps reverse climate change by building soil. It's like magic.
During World War II, people started planting home victory gardens to support the war effort. By 1944, nearly half of all fruits and veggies were coming from backyard gardens.
We're bringing victory gardens back, but this time it's for the climate.
Even a small garden has the potential to impact the global crisis of climate change.
Here are 5 ways to make your garden a regenerative climate victory garden. Ditch the chemicals, less disturbance. If you don't want it in your body, don't put it in your food. And stop turning your soil over so much.
2, keep the soil covered. Any plant is better than no plant. They protect and build the soil.
3, encourage biodiversity. Diversity is resilience. It makes America great, so it goes for your garden.
4, grow food. Food from your backyard means way fewer food miles than food shipped all the way to your grocery store.
5, compost. Make it, use it. It's a probiotic regenerative source for your soil.
We can all participate by making climate victory gardens that build soil and helps reverse climate change.
So plant your climate victory garden and add it to this map.
And share your photos of your garden's regenerative practices.
Okay. And then the modern victory garden looks a little more like this. Many of you used raised beds, and I'm curious to learn more about that myself. Any questions here?
I don't see any further questions, Pat.
Okay, well, great. So here's the fun part. Now we're going to talk about some things that I've observed going on in Central Virginia here. Well, there are a couple in here that I had to bring in a photo from somewhere else. I'm not the world's greatest photographer. Well, I'm not even close to great. That's not my thing. So let's start by looking at a few things. And what's the question I give you here? With those principles that we just went through, did anything strike you as something you'd like to change or begin to incorporate in your own garden? And if you type some of those things in the chat box while I'm going through this little list of things that I've observed, then we can have a chat at the end. It looks like a small enough group that we can actually chat some. First of all, using cover crops. As you know already, I've been working with the pollinator garden over in Powhatan. And one of the things that we did last year, a year ago, was plant radishes in September as a cover crop. And you can see here, the one on the left was in January. It was still in pretty good shape. In February, well, it was a little bit less. And in March, it was growing again. But then when we got to real spring, they just popped up and bloomed, and they really made a difference in the soil because of the way they loosened up things. And well, we pulled some of them. We tried to, when you've got a lot of people working on a project, the message doesn't always get to everybody. We meant to cut them off and leave the radishes in the ground, but some got pulled up. So this past year, we planted both radishes and lettuce. We had some success. The radishes weren't as happy as they had been the year before. So, you know, you never know about a crop. Ground covers. The one on the left is one of our Master Gardener volunteers who uses pachysandra as a ground cover rather than wood mulch. And the one on the right, and let me see, the ground cover is the part in the center, the lower center there. That a year ago was 3 small, tiny pussy toe plants over in the pollinator garden. And now they have grown. And the good thing about pussy toe is it puts out a shoot and then it sort of lands and makes a root. So it works around any other plants that you've got there and makes a wonderful, it's not going to strangle anything that is growing in around. We planted a couple more plants off in the distance there, is hoping to get a little bit more of that ground cover. On the other side, we planted wild strawberries, the native Virginia strawberry, among our milkweeds. That has almost gotten too happy this year. We might have to get that under control. I put this in here. I didn't have a good picture of anybody tilling anything, and that's a good thing. So don't do it. Now here, this was unfortunately in the fall instead of the spring, but we are cutting off annuals rather than pulling them up. So to leave the roots and the mycorrhizal associations in place. Rotating crops. This is something that I need to get more information from some people locally about. So if any of you do rotate your crops in a way that I can get a photograph to insert here, please let me know. Many people have compost heaps. I know that there's one in Powhatan County that I'm even contributing to. So it's a good way to get rid of waste without putting it in the dump. It's good for your garden, and it's just good. This is a picture of one of our volunteers and his Hügelkultur garden. You can see at the top how he put in those logs as I described, and then he put a lot, and you can see it's ready to go. And then in the picture on the bottom, he's got, I forget what he told me. I think he's got black-eyed peas growing there, something nitrogen rich, and I think that's the right crop. Chop and drop. We did this over in the pollinator garden just this last week. And I'm sorry about the shadow, but that's what time of day it was when we were there. On the left, we found a huge clover plant. We're crowding out our rosemary. So we pulled it up and we chopped it up and left it there. And 2 days later, well, no, it was Thursday, 3 days later, the right picture, it's the same place, if you can recognize the plants there, only different time of day without the shadow. And biodiversity, I know that some of my colleagues have some good pictures to replace this one with, but I like this one because of the color. And there we come to the end just in time for a good conversation. So, are there some things in the chat box, or shall I just take the PowerPoint down here and all of us come on the screen and chat? Or let's start with any questions or comments that are there.
Rosemary gave us a comment when you requested some suggestions of what people have learned and will do after your presentation. Rosemary said, put in more ground cover.
Yes, very good. I think ground cover is something that, well, I know it's something that I've undervalued in the past because I just haven't thought about it so much. You know, the practice when I was growing up was to clean things up and have bare soil. And now we know that that's not a good idea. So yeah, more ground covers. I'm all for that. Anything else? Well, then I'm going to, if we want, is there anybody who'd like to chat? I can, here, let's put us all up on the screen. There we go. Now we can all be on the screen, and you all can turn your videos and audios on, and we can chat since it's a nice small group. Oh, they all went to sleep on me.
Well, while they're trying to figure out what they'd like to talk about, let me just mention a few things, Pat, and we'll get back to the
Right.
First of all, I want to thank you very much. We certainly appreciate your time and your effort to share your expertise and help keep us informed. You mentioned that you would have a handout, and I wanted to let our participants know that the handout is available at our website. You can view it or print it. Follow the same path you did to register for the program. Or you can go to our YouTube channel and you'll find a link there in association with this recording, which, let me mention again, we are being recorded. It should be available in just a couple of days. So if you wanted to view some of this again, or you know someone who couldn't make it today, please let them know that they can get it through our website. And don't forget that the library has great resources for gardeners in the branches and through its digital library. So any discussion? I don't see that anybody removed their mutes.
Well, I would add a couple of things. And I did rush through this because I wanted to make sure we got through all of it. I did intend it only as an introductory overview sort of thing. And as you could see, we didn't go into much depth on anything. But if you have interest in some of those things, we have volunteers who might do a follow-up talk on just about any of this. And I hope that will be happening. The other thing I'd like to mention, both of those two videos I inserted, the first one, it was one of several that I selected from. I just liked it because, you know, cartoons simplify things, you know, and make it really easy to understand because of the visual. That particular agency has a whole lot more information. And the second one, the Kiss the Ground one, they have an inordinate amount of information available. Both of those links are on the handout. And also there's on the handout, there's a link to the Rodale Institute, which I highly recommend for information. You can go there and read about just about anything regenerative gardening wise that you might want to know about. They're doing fantastic research.
And also the participants will receive a survey after the presentation. If they have any suggestions for any follow-up presentations, please let us know. We appreciate that.
I wanted to say that I have Rodale Organic Gardening magazines that go back to 1983.
Really?
Even when I couldn't garden, when I couldn't, I lived someplace where I wasn't feasible. Yeah. At least I was able to garden vicariously through my magazines. So I still have them, and now where I live, I'm lucky enough to have some sunshine and some space. And so my raised beds are relatively new. And last year was the first year I put a cover crop on. And of course, the first thing I did this spring was till, because that's all I'd ever done. So
Yeah.
now I have this next year, like I put in the comments, I'll put my cover crop on, and it'll save me a lot of
Yeah.
work,
Well,
and not just in tilling, but in hauling mulch. So,
exactly. And the thing is, when you put that, like the chop and drop, when you put that plant residue on the top of the ground, you can plant in among it because
right.
it's going to disintegrate. You don't have to wait for it. It just go.
And luckily I'm unless something's seeding, I usually do that anyway. So I'm too lazy to haul it to the compost pile.
Yeah.
Try to make it easy, right? As easy as
Right.
possible.
Well, some of this really does make it
It
easier.
does. If I don't have to haul mulch, that's a huge easy.
Well, even with a pollinator garden over in Powhatan this year, because the strawberries had taken over so much of one part of it as a ground cover, we used a lot less mulch on that bed.
I have to tell you, at my other house, the wild strawberries were the bane of my 3 years, the last 3 years I lived there, because I let one go and it took over. I was pulling them every time I walked from my car to the front door, pull another handful of wild strawberries.
Well, yeah, I can see how that will be. And we've already decided that. Well, but the thing is, it grows around all the other stuff and just keeps it. We have a lot of tall growing perennials there. And so it just grows around them. So what we're going to do next spring is what I do with my that blue flower that I never can think of the name of, that I just pull it all back in the spring and let it regrow.
Well, they invaded my strawberry patch. My real strawberry patch.
Oh, I see. Now, see there, you made a mistake planting them together.
I didn't plant them together. It wasn't an option. It was not a choice. Most definitely did not plant those together.
I see.
They actually, the wild strawberries just appeared, and I kept trying to keep them out, and they just took over that whole side of my house.
Yeah. Well, they do like growing here.
Yeah. That's why they're indigenous.
Do you get berries from them?
Yes, which is very, I mean, the birds like them.
Yeah.
But I don't get any of my strawberries.
Well, if they probably like them better than your regular strawberries because they really do have a stronger flavor.
Yeah. But so yeah, I thought that was very, I mean, I've obviously, I mean, I've been doing a lot of research and I have been practicing a lot of what you were talking about, but there were a lot of things that it makes sense. I've been doing this for 30 some odd years. So, and it was not something I ever stopped to think about. So it really was a way of looking at it from a different perspective, which really I think is going to make my life a lot easier.
Well, and it's so important because, when you look at American agriculture, it has become such a monocropping thing. And
that's horrible. Yes.
It's horrible. And don't get me started on the whole GMO pesticide thing, because that's a whole nother thing. But American agriculture is, if it's not in crisis, it's real close to it. And, our gardening practices can just kind of be on the cutting edge and the leading straw here to get us back onto the right track. Because, there's a lot of, I'm an old Midwesterner. I grew up on a general farm in Northwest Ohio. And I know the soil there is,
it's gone.
Well, so much of it's gone. It's just not as rich as it should be.
Rosemary asks, can you eat wild strawberries?
Oh, rosemary. Absolutely. Yes. They make the best jam.
They just have a ton of seeds.
Oh, they do have a ton of seeds. That doesn't bother me, but it takes a long time to pick enough because they're tiny, but they're worth it. Yes, Rosemary, they are.
Kind of like wild blueberries.
Yeah, kind of like. My sister and I used to go up the road where there was a patch along the road before they started spraying along all the roads. And we used to sit on the ground and pick strawberries for half an hour and come back and Mom would make jam.
Okay.
Well, that's all I have.
Okay.
And I thank you all for joining me today. And I hope that some of you I see on this call will be the next speakers going into some depth on some of this stuff. So there's the challenge to you.
Thank you for sharing.
Yes, thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And thanks to our participants too. We hope you enjoyed it. And again, when you receive your survey, please give us some feedback. And join us, please, for our next virtual session, which will be held on Saturday, July 9th at 10 a.m. when Linda Toller will talk about planning and installing a rain garden. The registration for that is open now. So thank you all for joining us today. See you on July 9th.
Bye-bye.